Before we get started, I want to invite you to support the Business of Politics show by becoming a member of the Startup Caucus Network. For just $10 a month, you'll become a part of our community that's changing the culture of Republican campaigning through innovation. Visit businessofpoliticspodcast.com/join to learn more.
I think it's a really good time for Americans to say, let's lean into AI as citizens to hold our representatives accountable and to make sure that what they say they actually do and what they do actually works.
I'm Eric Wilson, managing partner of Startup Caucus, the home of campaign tech innovation on the right. Welcome to the Business of Politics show. On this podcast, you're joining in on a conversation with entrepreneurs, operatives, and experts who make professional politics happen. Our guest today is Paul Allen, founder of Citizen Portal, an AI-powered platform that helps citizens, elected leaders, and other stakeholders be informed and engaged in our representative democracy. He's also the co-founder and former CEO of Ancestry.com, which many of you have likely heard of. He's also served as the chief evangelist for Gallup's StrengthsFinder. In our show today, we learn more about Citizen Portal and what's drawn Paul to the political tech space for his next company. Paul, before we dig into what you're building with Citizen Portal, what prior involvement did you have in politics that caused you to look at this space for your next startup?
Well, I was a political science major when I started university in the early 80s. So I grew up in the most Republican county in the most Republican state in the United States. So I was a Utah County Reagan supporter as a high school student. And I, loved American history. I had 2 years of AP American history from a teacher who was actually the highest rated teacher in the state of Utah, a man named Dee Allred, a brilliant teacher and lover of the Constitution, American history. So I had AP Prep U.S. history my junior year, and then I had AP history my senior year, and I got a 5 on the AP exam. And I just thought political science is so awesome. So I started my college career in that. And then I took an international political class and I decided to switch my major to international relations. And then I made the mistake or made the fateful decision to take a Russian class. And on day one, I fell in love with the Russian language and the idea of speaking Russian. So I switched my major. I ended up graduating with a bachelor's degree in Russian. And of course, came to DC and interviewed with the groups that you could get employed by back in the day when you had a Russian degree. There was really no economic or business opportunity. It was back in the Cold War. It was just, work for the government or become a professor. So I kind of took a detour away from political science, but really with the same goal in mind, like freedom means a lot and liberty is worth any price. And when you think about political science and the geopolitical world that we live in today with some totalitarian, authoritarian governments, you kind of wonder, how did they get there? And why have we not gotten there? And hopefully we'll never get there. But, it's fascinating to study history, politics, political science, constitutions, legal structures, and especially today with the geopolitical situation in the world today. Like the gratitude I feel for having been born and raised in this country is immense.
It's something that we see a lot with entrepreneurs who, I won't say take the blessings of liberty for granted, but understand how fragile the environment is in which they are building companies and why company creation is happening in the United States and not other places. And then as you build a track record, you circle back to, okay, how do I make sure that this stays in place for the next generation of entrepreneurs? Paul, you're a very successful serial entrepreneur with multiple exits. So I want to give our listeners a window into how you think about building businesses. So what's the problem you identified, and you've alluded to it already, and what's your hypothesis for solving it with Citizen Portal?
Well, the great Paul Allen, the late great Paul Allen, who co-founded Microsoft with Bill Gates, if you've read his
relation.
No relation, unfortunately. But if you read his biography, it's called Idea Man. And what Paul did in his 40-year career as an innovator and a financier and as an entrepreneur was he would ask the question, what should exist? And then if he answered that question, he would go build it. Once he realized something should exist that doesn't, he would build it or fund it or back it. So I think I've kind of had that same DNA. I just think what should exist. When Ancestry.com was born, I was in the right place at the right time and realized that all the world's genealogy records could sit on the internet and be available to every human being. And that was in September of 95, when I was in San Francisco at an internet conference. And then because we have freedom, we can go do stuff like that without permission. And so we just, public domain content was our best friend back in the Ancestry era. And birth, marriage, death records, military property records, all the kinds of records that you could gather, digitize, index, and make searchable were available freely to anybody. Anybody could have done what I did. Yeah. The thing about Citizen Portal and the hypothesis is that the internet actually totally disrupted the newspaper industry over the past 2 or 3 decades, and the dollars available for
specifically
local
Craigslist, right?
Exactly.
The
Craigslist
on classified advertising.
For sure. That was a huge factor, but then also just attention and readership and viewership. Think of all the eyeballs that are on TikTok every day and YouTube. And so the video first advertising supported model has largely sucked the dollars out of the newspaper industry. So there's almost no good journalistic coverage of the governments that we live under. And so if they can't afford to send a journalist to a state legislature meeting or a city council meeting or a county meeting, the citizens don't have that fourth pillar of government, that fourth estate functioning anymore. And I think personally, my hypothesis is that the decline of trust in government, which is really tragically low. I think Gallup did a poll a week ago that said Mexico, 75% of the citizens of Mexico think the Mexican government is corrupt, and 74% of American citizens think the government is corrupt. Yeah. So we're ranked up there with African dictators in terms of citizen trust of government. Now that's sickening, actually, but I think it's largely exacerbated by the fact that nobody knows what's really going on in public meetings. We don't have time in our busy lives as parents and wage earners and whatever busy things we've got going on in our personal lives. We don't have time to be a citizen to go to all the meetings. That's why we elect representatives to go for us. Right. But if the fourth estate, the freedom of the press, and an honest, objective group of journalists no longer exists, and instead we get left side talking points, right side talking points, and social media amplifying the noisiest noise because it creates engagement and therefore ad dollars, we're kind of in a perfect storm right now. So the hypothesis is, well, every single public meeting in the United States that's being recorded, which most meetings are supposed to be, can now be transcribed by AI, built into a powerful search engine, and then AI can match your personal interests as a citizen with the very content that is affecting your life at the local, state, or federal level. So AI does these magical things, and now every citizen can have their own fourth estate, this direct feed of what really was said by my representatives or others in that elected body that affect my life, that interact with or intersect with my issues that I care about as a citizen. So I think it can lead to a newly created generation of informed and engaged citizens and really restore that missing element, which is knowledge. Informed citizenry is required. Jefferson said, if a nation expects to be ignorant and free, it expects what never has been and never will be.
Right. And timing, as we know, is also a critical part of launching a startup that gains traction and achieves product market fit. You can have the right business model and the right technology, but if your market isn't right, you'll flop. So what's the confluence of events that you see happening in politics, media, and technology that makes this the right time for something like Citizen Portal?
Well, I agree that timing is actually the biggest factor of all. So Bill Gross, who ran Idea Labs in Pasadena for decades and started over 100 or 200 successful companies, he's one of the greatest entrepreneurs in history. He actually did a study and found that I believe 42% of the weight of what factors would lead to success for a startup was timing. It was more important than the team, than the product, than the market size, or the amount of funding that had been raised.
I see it all the time in politics too.
Yes, no, it's there's nothing more powerful than an idea whose time has come. But if it's the wrong time, it's like, ooh, sorry, come back 10 years from now, ship pet food over the internet, 10, 20 years later, but, pets.com and whatever, all the grocery deliveries, there was so many failures in the 90s. Mark Andreessen basically said they just missed the timing. Okay, so to answer your question, I think that there are several factors that make this the perfect time. I already described the perfect storm of negative reasons why citizens are no longer informed, engaged, and they don't trust their government. Okay, that's been happening for some time. But video as our primary way of learning really came on the scene in COVID, where workplaces and even government meetings were now being Zoomed and recorded. And so there was this massive increase in available video content. And secondly, the AI transcription costs have come down based on Moore's law. It used to be, many, many dollars per hour, and now it's actually declining. I actually see the day where transcribing an hour of video will cost like 2 cents or 3 cents. It's really
right.
plummeting.
It's just built into the product, right? I mean, the software we're using to record this podcast has transcription built into it.
Well, they're paying quite a bit for it. You're paying them, but I'm saying the costs. I mean, for me, I've seen it plummet, 75, 80%, couple of years in a row. Right. And when that continues for 2 or 3 more cycles, it'll be 2 cents, 3 cents an hour. So almost free to transcribe everything. Search engines are almost free to use and to build. And then AI is really powerful. It's kind of expensive to use a large language model to prompt the AI to find the portion of the transcript that doesn't just have a keyword match, but is actually what you need to know as a citizen or an elected official. So looking at the words and phrases is important. You can do all kinds of keyword searches, but the best part is what Citizen Portal is doing next, which is if you care about, let's say, childhood literacy, and you don't want to know every time books are mentioned in your school council meeting or childhood reading, what you want to know is, are there any new ideas? Are there any programs across the country that people are trying or reporting that they worked? And so all of a sudden you can use a ChatGPT prompt or some other large language models that we're experimenting with. And you could say, okay, go do a query across the United States, what every school board is saying about a certain topic. But look for the times where people are saying, hey, we tried this and it worked. And here's the statistics. Like, one of the cool things about democracy is it's this laboratory. It's actually thousands of laboratories where we could try different policies. But if they don't work, if they don't result in the outcomes that we were aiming for, they were bad policies. If they do work, they ought to spread across the country. Right. So we think Citizen Portal, because of the availability of video, transcriptions, AI to look for intent, and to look for success, and then spread that success. I mean, it's perfect timing to launch this and to make it freely available to every American citizen for the local content and state content that affects their life. If you want to understand what's going on nationwide, you pay a small monthly subscription fee similar to an Ancestry.com, although much less expensive. Mm-hmm. And you become a super powerful, informed citizen that can advocate forcefully for things that worked in Oklahoma or Kansas, but they need to be introduced in Missouri. That's the kind of exciting goal that I think we're looking at here. It's going to require lots of citizens to be involved. I like to say that self-government requires a lot more selves than we are currently providing.
Yeah. You're listening to the Business of Politics show. I'm speaking with Paul Allen, founder of Citizen Portal, about connecting citizens with information about their governments and using new artificial intelligence technology to do that. Paul, one of the challenges that we have in this space is that elected officials and bureaucrats don't always want public information to be easily accessible for obvious reasons. We see a lot of malicious compliance, for example, with Freedom of Information Act requests where, they've got the data online in some sort of cloud-based software, but then they send the requester PDFs or printed out documents. So what are you doing to overcome that with Citizen Portal?
I would not want to be an elected official that doesn't believe in transparency and that has something to hide.
And yet they exist.
Well, they do, but their days are numbered. If you think about the surveillance state that we were all worried about with Edward Snowden's revelations, what the NSA or the CIA or any law enforcement in the United States is, hoovering up U.S. citizens' data or metadata, and what could be done with that in the wrong hands. That's kind of a scary prospect. Well, public meetings are public, and government documents largely, unless they're classified, are public. And so there's going to be a massive amount of access that citizens will have powered by AI. AI will start to detect patterns of bad behavior among elected officials. I think it's a really good time for Americans to say, let's lean into AI as citizens to hold our representatives accountable and to make sure that what they say they actually do and what they do actually works. And then they're not self-serving. They're not self-dealing. There is a revolving door. I've read The Payoff. I've read Throw Them All Out. I've read research about corruption in Washington and in both parties and insider trading and things like that. So that exists, but the time for that is limited because citizens will soon be very tipped off by AI about what's really going on. And I think honest and good politicians are going to have to step forward because they're the ones that will actually survive the scrutiny. The surveilled are going to soon be surveilling the surveillors. And I know that's kind of, sci-fi type thing. I'm not trying to be crazy about.
Yeah.
Yeah. The Circle is amazing. Oh my gosh. Yeah. That was an incredible book. But I do think that, access to knowledge is power, and citizens will soon have incredible access to AI filtered knowledge on the issue you care about and the things that have worked and the things that don't work. And so I'm very, very enthusiastic about the resurgence of representative democracy in the coming years, powered by AI.
There's an interesting microcosm of this, right? So there's a Twitter account called Unusual Whales, and it's tracking the stock trades of members of Congress.
Yes.
Well, that data has been available for decades now. Within the last 10 years became available online, but only with that mix of, hey, we have a kind of a post Wall Street bets in retail investor culture mixed with social media, and talk about timing. But that data now comes together in that useful way, which is now leading us to look at, okay, well, should we restrict members of Congress on the individual trades that they're able to make?
Sunlight Foundation
Right.
does a good job of tracking donations, but there's no central place. If you had a citizen portal with tens of millions of active users, and Ballotpedia is fantastic because people go there to kind of find out who to vote for. But after you vote, we kind of basically say we're done. Like
Right.
Citizens aren't doing anything after that. Like you put your I voted sticker on and you feel very patriotic. But if the barbarians are running the asylum, or that's the wrong metaphor, isn't it?
Just a few metaphors, yeah.
Yeah, I mixed a few metaphors together. But if your representatives aren't doing what's good for the country, you've abdicated your responsibility as a citizen. So I think there's a chance to take all the data sets. And of course, Ancestry.com is a pretty good example of a group of people getting together saying, what if we put tens of billions of records on the internet and millions of family trees that are already connected? And what if we used AI to help everyone fill out their family tree going back as many generations as possible? That's a pretty big data problem. Politics compared to that is really small, actually. Mm-hmm. And so there's this awesome opportunity to build a platform that tens of millions of people can use, maybe even hundreds of millions can use it freely. And then some percentage of them will become paying customers for some supercharged features. But imagine AI that detects legislation sponsored by different representatives that has a bias, where there are certain winners and losers in defense industry or in the healthcare industry or in the energy industry. Like, maybe that legislation was poorly written, and AI will be able to start detecting who will be the winners and losers from this policy.
Let me challenge one of the assumptions to your business model here, because we have a lack of informed citizens. And a theme that we discuss on this show often is that voters are consuming politics as entertainment. And for better or worse, these local governments, regulatory agencies aren't as exciting to watch. So how do we get American citizens to take more of an interest in the less entertaining aspects of self-government?
Actually, that's probably the best question, Eric. So I don't know if I have the perfect answer for that. I am idealist and optimistic, and I think the long arc of history has been good for the world. People kind of figure stuff out. I think the pendulum really swung away from citizen involvement over the decades to entertainment. And, it's a gladiator contest, and the different amplified, polarized media and social media has just made it worse and worse. And so it's toxic and polarizing. And that's very entertaining for a lot of people. You love to watch the debates and the bloodbath and how many insults they are. When Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton had their debate, it was one of their famous debates. It was really ugly and brutal and, bitter until the moderator asked one question: name something good about your opponent. Mm-hmm. And it was very touching to watch them try to compliment each other. And a couple of the things that were said were quite sincere, I think. And it was a totally different tone. It wasn't ugly. It was actually moving. And, most political campaigns are negative, and the country finds that engaging and entertaining. Maybe it works because of how our brains are wired. But I also think we're all waking up to the fact that, hey, things aren't going in the right direction. So whether it's Gen Z or millennials or Gen Xers or whatever, somebody's going to identify that the direction we've been going isn't working. And, I'm not saying civic education in high schools is good or that there isn't as much of that. I think the million citizens in this country who get naturalized every year know more about the country and its history and its values than almost any high school student.
I mean, I wonder what percentage of Americans could pass the 10. 10
I doubt very many, honestly. Right. I think it's very small. But there's 1 million naturalized citizens per year, Eric. And if you know lots of those people, and I know dozens who've been naturalized in the last few years, including one person who's going to be Utah's wealthiest person in the next few years. He came from Canada and got naturalized. My friend from Lebanon who runs the social media for SHRM and a bunch of other great organizations. And it's the most moving part of their life experience to become an American citizen. And the rest of us take it for granted. Okay, well, what if you start with those million? What if you take the 20 million who've been naturalized in the last 10, 20 years and help them become extremely involved in local government or state government? They are grateful beyond measure for what this country provided for them. They left some other less than ideal situation to come here, and many of them are very entrepreneurial. As you know, most entrepreneurial businesses are first or second generation immigrants who, right, including Silicon Valley, a lot of the $1 trillion companies. Okay, so I think there's a there. There's a subset of the country that really loves this country and cares about preserving what's good about it. Start there, and then those people could influence others to actually care as well. Now, if your local school board is passing a ruling that's going to definitely affect your kids, you do show up.
Right.
Like parents and kids, like if the lives of your family are affected, or if a zoning thing is going to pass that's going to, cost your home value or change your quality of life, rarely people get involved, but they do when it really affects them. So here's the point. If AI can help you find out just the right time and just the right issues where you really do care, instead of watching boring C-SPAN that is just like talking heads for hours and hours, it's like, oh, I got a 3-minute clip that actually does affect me. It's a call to action. AI can go from, ad nauseum content from the congressional record to your local meetings, all the transcripts like that don't relate to you at all, to the ones that affect your career or your neighborhood or your school or your taxes or your wallet. And all of a sudden, AI could actually help you do things that will matter and improve the quality of life. So I know I'm idealistic, Eric, and you're probably right. I watch C-SPAN all the time. I love it. And I know I'm not a very common personality type. I get teased a lot for my wonkiness.
For what it's worth, I think that's right, because when we see examples of this throughout projects on the internet, Wikipedia, most of the articles written by a few really dedicated volunteers.
That's right.
Open source software projects. Few people. It's astonishing, these big companies that rely on 1 or 2 volunteers to update the dependencies of some open source library.
Well said.
And so you see you get enough leverage. So I share your optimism on that.
And the founders was a tiny, like the founders of this country, it was a small percentage that was really ready to resist England and to declare independence. It wasn't the majority at the beginning. So I think there are some reasons to be optimistic.
Well, so let's turn our attention now to the media. So there's obviously a lot of concern about the decline of local media. I'm of the mindset that it's more about business model that failed to adapt to changes in technology than a lack of funding. But what's the role that you see corporations, whether that's through lobbyists or trade associations, playing in government accountability?
Well, I don't think they generally play in the government accountability. I think they're generally the ones that are trying to guide government towards their best outcome, not the general welfare.
Okay.
I mean, I just think lobbyists write a lot of the legislation, or all of it. I'm not sure how much any elected official has ever written any legislation. I'm not sure. Maybe they have. When I was at the Facebook hackathon at the U.S. Capitol in 2011, I believe, and Kevin McCarthy was there, and there were Republicans and Democrats there, and Facebook hosted this. And my little think tank group, we got to be featured on the main stage because we proposed that there should be a GitHub for legislative markup, so that every word and phrase entered into a bill we would know the provenance of it, who wrote it, when was it submitted, every word that was changed. It'd be like writing software where everything you check out and check in is traceable to a person. Right now, you get a lobbyist writing a 75-page financial bill and somebody puts their name on it and submits it. Okay, well, AI will soon be able to detect. In fact, AI can detect who wrote certain things. I mean, J.K. Rowling was outed for one of her books because AI detected her word patterns as an author. And, some university researcher basically called her out and said, "Hey, you wrote that book." And she said, "Yep, I did." So, so interestingly, there will be all kinds of AI. I mean, we are entering the very, very, very beginning of how AI will change the world. And I believe it can change it for bad, and lots of people will want to use it for bad things. But I believe that good people will use it for incredible things in education and in work and in the political and democratic sphere. I think there will be all kinds of good things. Now, corporations have to all decide how to use AI. We don't necessarily want to replace humans, but you could use AI to augment every human. And Johnny Taylor, the CEO of SHRM, recently said that HI plus AI equals ROI. And that means human intelligence amplified by AI is going to be the future of ROI. Well, okay, so for businesses, that's true. What about in government? How can Newt Gingrich once challenged me with this question: could AI write better legislation than humans? So a call was set up with Sebastian Thrun, who was running the self-driving cars initiative at Google. And he gave a master class to Newt and me for an hour about how to build machine learning models. This was like 2005. And he actually gave us some reasons to hope that someday AI will see the outcomes of different laws and policies. And if you had Gallup data or BLS data or economic data that's objective, you could actually start tying good legislation to growth and prosperity, and bad legislation to poor outcomes, whether that's corruption or it's just a policy that had unintended consequences that were horrible. And over time, let's say a few years of that kind of feedback loop, AI could detect if legislation was likely to be good for people or bad for people. Now, I don't know. That's a slippery slope, and I don't want AI becoming an elected official itself. And I don't believe in sentience ever. I don't think AI will ever have a soul or the ability to think and act and feel for itself. I do think it will approximate human reasoning, and it will way surpass us in its ability to recall and process. So it's definitely going to be a super intelligence, but to me, it's never going to be sentient. So I wouldn't want an unfeeling AI, even if it is trained or pretends it can learn how to feel or talk like it feels. I don't believe that. So I think humans are the greatest of all creations and always will be. So we should be in charge of our own countries, our own laws and rules, but we could be aided by AI to find what's good, what's corrupt, what's legitimate, what's not, and to detect the things that we should stamp out in our societies.
Well, Paul, we could go for another half hour, I think. So definitely want to have you come back in the future, and we'll see how the AI optimism is playing out. I happen to be on your side of that argument. My thanks to Paul Allen for a great conversation. Check out Citizen Portal. The link in our show notes. Go play with it. It's live. You can start seeing what's going on in your area. If this episode made you a little bit smarter or gave you something to think about, all we ask is that you share it with a friend or colleague. Remember to subscribe to the Business of Politics Show wherever you get your podcasts, so that way you'll never miss an episode, especially if this is your first time listening. Give it a try. You can check all of our past episodes at businessofpoliticspodcast.com. You can also sign up for email updates there as well. With that, I'll say thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.